Which punishment, either real or imagined, sounds light or not a big deal at first, but is actually horrific to experience. As a kid, when I did something wrong I'd have to write a sentence 500 times as punishment. I remember having to sit in the car at a family reunion at probably 7 years old writing "I am a bad girl" 500 times because I'd taken a granola bar without asking. Writing "I am a bad girl" that many times, repeated for minor infractions and sentences like "I am a liar and no one likes liars," or "I ruined the day for my family," just sticks with you and becomes internalized. I'm 31 now. It's been a good 15 years since I've had to write these, but I still think them about myself. Haha, great memories. Frick you, John. Burn in heck. Bread and water rations. It was there to cause weaponized constipation. 30 days of constant abdominal pain, specifically tailored to humiliate, is a lot worse than "oh, bland food, boo-hoo." As someone with bowel issues, I can guarantee that this would incapacitate almost anyone going through it. Something I actually did to myself. I needed to cut weight for a wrestling tournament in a drastic way. Because of a mix-up in weight classes I needed to drop 16 pounds overnight. Told my coaches that's not possible, just pull me from the roster, but my head coach pulls me aside and tells me there might be a way and you don't even have to work out. What you do is fill a bathtub up with the hottest water you can stand and add a bag of Epsom salt and some rubbing alcohol to the water. Go into the bathroom with a buddy, stuff towels under the door so cool air can't get in, and then get in the tub neck deep. After 60 seconds your body will already be screaming to get out of the water because you're overheating. I stayed in for 45 minutes, adding more hot water every 2-3 minutes to ensure the heck never ended. The buddy is there to make sure you don't die. Sweat out 11 pounds in 45 minutes. Peeling salted sunflower seeds with your bare hands. Had the choice between that and getting my butt beaten with a cable when I screwed up big time when I was LKE 6 years old. Chose the peeling and I regretted that immensely. It doesn't sound bad at first, but let me tell you, after 1 hour you just want to hold your hands in ice water. Your fingertips get sore. Sometimes you prick your skin and the salt dries out your fingers and makes them really sensitive. Not to mention that the salt creeps up your nail bed and hurts like crap, especially if you rip your skin near your fingernails. I never chose that punishment again. That's fricked up. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff, and anybody who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunting you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law, and anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? It's like the purge, but just you. Having to play with chicken. My grandpa always told me, when the neighbor's kid would misbehave, 100 years plus since then, his parents would lock him into the chicken habitat and put some liquid and or meat on his feet. The chickens would peck at his feet and he would have to flee constantly until he was too tired to. Then he would be released. What the frick? Goat licking. In medieval times you would get your feet strapped between two wooden boards and they'd be sprinkled in salt, or similar, so animals, mainly goats, would lick them. Seems like it'd tickle at first, but they won't stop licking. Apparently they'd lick flesh off until they hit bones. Having been licked by a cat for a minute or two, I can imagine this as an awful torture. Getting away with a crime by pleading insanity. Instead of a definite custodial sentence you get an indefinite custodial sentence in an underfunded and terrifying medical facility, maybe for the rest of your life. Yay. Being ignored or ostracized might not sound like much, but as humans we need that social contact, and leave it too long and it becomes incredibly damaging. I remember even as a kid, I got so scared whenever my brother would flat out pretend not to hear me speak, or not acknowledge me whenever I was being an annoying little crap. That was a lot more scary to me than anything else. As a person, you want to be remembered, to be at the very least acknowledged. Now imagine that being taken away from you. Tickling. No joke, the Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. My sister and cousins did that to me when I was little. They thought it was a joke and wouldn't stop until I started violently vomiting. Listening to the same song on loop, then skipping parts of the song. This was a form of torture used by the CIA and it's absolutely awful. My dad told me about a punishment that was given in schools when he was growing up, born in 1954, which was you had to go to the side of the aisle of desks and squat down into like the Asian Russian squat stance and hold it for the rest of class. He said it never sounded bad, but after a while your muscles and knees would lock up, and at the end of class in order to get out of the position you had to fall onto your side or back to the floor to let your legs relax enough to allow you to move and use them. He told me when I was super young, but it's always stuck with me cause I was so surprised that something that seemingly small would cause so much pain and loss of control. You essentially got insane Charlie horses when you dropped out of the position. Read a story once that a Russian soldier was forced to squat for 4 hours, a really long time, as part of a hazing ritual, and afterward due to a loss of blood to his lower body they had to amputate his legs and genitals. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek Deep Space Nine that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation. The idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated, and he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence. Or maybe it was longer, but in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food, he was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up, and only an hour had passed. Actually, the best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Closing your hand around a chunk of salt water ice and holding it there, dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold onto it for as long as they can stand. It can lead to frostbite injuries similar to 2nd and 3rd degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin. So if you try to open your hand it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago, before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Glad this thing did not become so big on social medias that I'd run into it. My hands hurts from imagining. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the DFAC no more than 20 minutes after we had been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 PM to 10 PM without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. We had a guy purposefully lock his knees so he would pass out. Apparently there are clever ways to get out of some of these punishments. Has anyone seen that Black Mirror White Christmas episode? Imagine being locked in a room with nothing. Like, really nothing. And all you have is endless boredom. That's horrifying. Solitary confinement. You'll think that isolating certain people can be good for society, but in the end it screws up your mind so bad lots of people come out worse than when they went in. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's weird seeing it used so casually in so many prison shows and documentaries, like how you caused some trouble that's a week in solitary for you, but in a lot of countries solitary confinement is literally banned because of how inhumane it is. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they could not move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly onto a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming, and after long durations were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of the forehead. You're sorta right. They were blindfolded and leaned back. You were also restrained and maybe had earplugs or rags stuffed in your ears. They removed all senses. They also would vary the rate of the drops. The torture comes in when you throw off their sense of time. They have no idea when to expect the next drop. Wall sits, air chair, are very painful when done wrong. Lining your heel with your knee is the wrong way to wall sit, but this was how I was forced to do it. Arms out in front like chair arms so you can't support yourself. 90-degree angles and no sliding. When I was around 10 years old, being forced to stand in the corner of the living room with my parents and siblings in the room and stare at the wall for hours. I remember a TV show once that suggested timeouts be 1 minute long for every year old the kid was. Not sure if that's based on any science, but it seemed reasonable to me. But I also can't imagine giving my 10-year-old a timeout. Kneeling insult. When I was 16, my mother told me if I kept my attitude up I'd be kneeling in salt. Being a dumb kid, I was like, oh whatever, it's just salt. Well, I kept that attitude up. My mom sprinkled a light dusting of salt on the tile floor in the kitchen and I had to kneel in salt for a half hour. The grains cut my knees and burned the wounds. I'm 32 now and I still have scars on my knees. I will add this before I hit reply, I know this was abuse. My mom was pregnant at the time and not in a good place mentally. My sister is now 16 and has never even had as much as a slap. Just recently my sister told me she thinks I was just a bad kid if mom did all that to me. I told my mother about the conversation after and my mother said you weren't a bad kid. None of you were. I just had a temper and I didn't know how to control it. I'll admit, I'm an adult now with 2 kids of my own and hearing her say that made me cry on the way home. I knew in my head I wasn't a bad child. I rarely got into trouble, never did drugs. I just had an attitude. But I hadn't realized how heavy my heart was. I was the first of 3 kids, I got the worst of it, and I always blamed myself. Even when I was finally over it and rebuilt a relationship with my mom, I blamed myself. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say that until she did. This was 3 weeks ago, and I'm tearing up just typing this. Hugs. That is really a really heavy load. Worst punishment I ever received was no punishment. Just weeks of anxiously waiting for a punishment that never came. I was the best kid ever for those couple of weeks. Didn't Source do something like this? I think there was this experiment they did where people are more likely to get the more intense electrical shock right then and there than to wait like 30 minutes and get the weaker shock. Because the idea of getting the shock was worse than actually shock. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my 8 unit got in trouble. The sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment, which was painting rocks. As dumb as a punishment it is. The sadistic side was that this training unit was in southern Arizona during peak summer temperatures. The rocks were literally hot enough to fry an egg on and both privates' hands ended up being covered with 2nd-degree burns. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what, but it probably one of the most severe I had ever heard a drill sergeant receive. At first I thought painting rocks means creating those beautiful mandala designs on pebbles or something, but this is literally painting rocks. Being found not guilty by reason of insanity. No matter the length of sentence you are given, it is up to the doctors to determine when you can be released. A sentence of 10 years in a psychiatric facility could mean 20, 30, or life. The doctors will only release you when they determine it's safe for you to re-enter society and you are no longer a threat. What doctor is going to release someone and take the chance you'll re-offend? Almost none. You'll also be given medications that have terrible side effects. You'll put on a bunch of weight, feel sleepy all the time, dizzy, and eventually develop repetitive movements. You'll be in the general population with other people suffering from severe mental illness, which can drive you crazy in itself. The upside is it may be slightly cleaner than regular prison. You have a little more space to move around the entire unit, even though it's going to be small, and eventually you can earn day passes. Compared to regular prison, it may be a little better overall, but it is still a horrible way to spend your life. It's also incredibly difficult to have this defense apply to your case. So if someone does a crime and thinks they can just plead insanity and be out in 10 years, they are most likely not going to be found insane. That farm pit punishment they used to use in Eastern Europe, where the criminal is made to stand in a pit on a hog farm for a day, which starts out empty, but then the hog manure pours in with them as the hogs produce it. I'm always shocked by the number of people who consider it better than jail etc when it's brought up, just because it's only a day. Sounds similar to the chicken poop prison in Thailand. You'd end up in severe respiratory distress due to the ammonia. People rarely survived a month and former inmates were left with chronic lung disease and PTSD. White room torture. Everything white, tasteless, no sound, room temperature kept at body temperature, if I remember correctly, just a bed, toilet, water and food, nothing that could be used in any way to alleviate the boredom. It doesn't seem that big at first, just nothing to do for a while, but it's in truth some of the worst torture one can experience. There are a couple of Black Mirror episodes that riffed on the theme of boredom as the ultimate punishment. The Christmas episode was horrific when you think about it. In both cases, it shows the flip side of what happens if we had the technology to capture our brains and stick them into a computer. It means we can live forever. On the downside, we could be punished forever with boredom. Famine walls. This was something I had never heard of until I took a trip to Ireland and saw them firsthand. These were famine walls and they were built during the famine of the 1840s as a means to keep the hungry masses out of the estates of the landowners. We learned it was the usually homeless Catholics who built the walls, for a few scraps to eat. According to our guide, massive, largely pointless work projects like the famine walls and the famine roads kept the masses barely alive during the 4 years that the potato crop failed. The British rule had proclaimed that the poor had to work for sustenance and not be given charity. Just think about how demoralizing this would be, day after day, building stone walls with zero purpose just to earn your bread and soup for the day. The shocking thing is the scope of the famine walls. They're literally everywhere on the countryside as far as you can see. There are a lot of these types of projects in India too. My cousin, 10-year, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room so that he even can't watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on a small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. I had to go sleep as a punishment, so shut us down in the middle of day, so it was extremely dark. I could only see my alarm clock and I had to lay still in my bed until the next morning. That meant for about 17-20 hours. For a child this feels like eternity. Time. People underestimate the impact of duration of a sentence. In the US, it's not uncommon to hear in the news that someone received a 1-year sentence for such and such crime and thinking, wow, that's so short, they'll be out in no time. The numbers just seem so abstracted we forget just how vast even a single year is. Even for minor offenses, something like 30 days can be quite large. Imagine the impact on a person for having their life interrupted for an entire month. That will cost most people their jobs. Sentence durations are pretty arbitrary and many of them are just the way they are because historically that is the duration that was expected. Any changes are relatively minor. The truth is that modern sentences in the US are among the longest in the world and disproportionately large. When visiting Africa, we learned that some places have their own form of lethal injection for criminals. By snakebite, rapists and murderers would be forced to receive a bite on both ankles from a puff adder. After officials verified the bites, they'd be sent home, under supervision, to spend their last days with their family. Some people thought it sounded like a more humane form, but it's not. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, others were more or less like it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal now, when you put it like that? Yeah, what's the big deal? Take someone, make them lay down and hold them down so they can't move, pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he tapped out of it, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say definitely torture before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong. Don't forget that you're on a slight decline so the water actually flows up your nose. My dad is the king of cruel and unusual punishments. He forced me and my brother to drink pint after pint of water without allowing us to use the toilet. Made me run up and down stairs when I was 9 for hours on end until I confessed to something I didn't do. Doesn't sound bad until you actually do it. No, it sounds pretty bad. We don't have to try it. Behavior like that as a punishment is actually pretty abusive. Preventing a child in any way from accessing a bathroom as a punishment is abusive. I definitely isn't normal. I'm stretching the definition of light here by a long way, but when I heard of death by 1000 cuts I thought I would be someone giving you a bunch of cuts until you bleed out. Painful, bit extreme, but the reality is so much worse. Turns out cuts is a bit of a mistranslation, and it should really be slices. The executioner slices big chunks off your body systematically, up to muscles and whole limbs, with the aim of keeping you alive as long as possible. There are a handful of pictures of the process being done which are just about the most horrific thing I've ever seen. I read about Vlad the Impaler, who impaled 1000 of people. Most drawing has the person sitting on a spike, up the butt, and your weight slowly moved it until it showed up outside your body again. When my grandmother was in Auschwitz, the Nazis used to make girls sing for them. Being forced to sing for the very same people that threw your mother, father, sisters and brothers into the gas chambers is a horrific thing. Any punishment where, even if it doesn't physically harm the person, you make them do it for a long time. I was punished at a very young age, somewhere between 7-10, for not being manly, so my stepfather, bastard of all time, decided to toughen me up. He sat me down on the sofa and told me, under no circumstances was I allowed to leave the sofa. If I needed the toilet I was to tell him and he would let me go to the bathroom, but if I took longer than a few minutes, he would come in to make sure I wasn't hiding. Now that doesn't sound so bad, sitting on the sofa psh. That wasn't my punishment. My punishment to toughen me up was I was to sit on the sofa, not moving, and not allowed to look away, and he put on horror movie after horror movie after horror movie all day, from morning to my bedtime, and these were 80s horror movies: Prince of Darkness, Poltergeist, Hellraiser, Night of the Demons, the OG Evil Dead, not the sequels, the Living Dead films. I love horror now that I am an adult, but for little kid me, I literally couldn't sleep properly or speak for a week. And I'm pretty sure I'm mentally messed up in some ways, but that was just an example of how much of an utter, and I'm sorry Americans, see this sucker was. Jesus Christ. That be torture for me now, and I'm nearing 30. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.